Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for our collaboration talk with Kaitzak and Hoki, Armenian youth. As you know, tonight's theme is, or title of the talk is Reclaiming Narratives, where we have Mariam and Sarah, who will introduce themselves a little bit later, talking about some of the storytelling and how we can utilize it to create healthier communities on an individual and on a community level. Collective level. So I'm André. My name is André V-Boghossian. I'm located in Melbourne, Australia, and I'm the current youth ambassador to Australia. And Sarah herself is the youth ambassador to Berlin, Heidelberg. Sorry, not Berlin, Germany, Heidelberg. And basically, due to this youth ambassador program, we've been able to come together and do this collaboration. So just to begin, I'm going to talk a little bit about, very briefly, some of these government initiatives that allow this type of work to happen. And then I'll hand over to Sarah and Mariam to give the talk. So welcome and hello. So very quickly, ZapTalks, bring expertise from the community to you. This is going to be a series of talks that we hold with different experts within our community that can basically create better outcomes, can help people learn about different career paths, whether it's in academia or it's professional, business, entrepreneurial, anything like that. And we also ask that if people, A, want to give a talk, to get in touch with us, and B, if they know someone that would be a great candidate for this, to just email us at hello@kaitzak.com.au or just contact us however you can. Again, very briefly, just for those who don't know what Kaitzak is, Kaitzak is a first global platform inspired by pillars of positive psychology, which is dedicated to building a healthy diaspora. So right now we're in Australia, but we do have a global perspective, as evidenced by this talk, working with other diaspora communities around the world, in this case in Germany. And you can find more info at our website, kaitzak.org. The current organizations we've been focusing on in our initial development period, we've been around for about a year now. The first is Government of Republic of Armenia, and the second is the MAP Alumni Association at the University of Pennsylvania, which Mariam will speak a little bit more about. And both these organizations, both these different, one, the Republic of Armenia has allowed us to basically join other diaspora communities and join them with Kaitzak, and the University of Pennsylvania has provided some grant money for us to do our work. So the Youth Ambassador Program, which Sarah and I participated in, as you can see, I try to find all the photos that Sarah and I were in together. We basically met in Armenia, in Yerevan, for 2 weeks and went through a bunch of meetings with the different civil society groups, different government institutions. We met with the Minister of Education. We met with the High Commission of Diaspora Affairs, and we basically went through various issues and resolutions that involve the entire diaspora, and there were representatives from 20 different countries. There was 30 of us, from the US to India to China, Belarus, Russia, lots of countries, and some of the ambassadors are actually in the audience tonight. So big shout out to you guys. Thanks for coming. So this is the global map of everyone we're sort of working with at the moment. Now, how can you get involved? This is just a little bit a slide about me, just my thing, my CV in the community, just working with the church, Kaitzak, Hominet Men Through Sport, the Office of the High Commissioner, and just teaching English for a little while a few years ago. There's 2 avenues that we're proposing, so civil society and public sector. Civil society, there's a number of different groups you can get involved with. You can just Google or contact us for any more information. This is just a very brief outline. Groups that allow, if you decide to move to Armenia, groups that you can get involved with. If you want to help from afar, there's another bunch of groups, and then there's also those organizations that you can donate to from the diaspora. Now, the public sector initiatives, there's a lot of them. We won't go into detail of this, but as you can see, the Youth Ambassador Program is on there as well. eGorts is another one where you can work within a government institution for a certain stipend. And there's the Armenian National Youth Forum coming up this year in August. Here are some deadlines, and here's a QR code if you can get your phone out quick enough before I go to the next slide. Thanks, guys. That's almost the full extent of how much I'm going to talk. So I'll jump in a little bit later again, and I'll just hand over to our speakers. Thanks for being here.
All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Mariam Vahradyan, and today we're going to be talking about how we can reclaim our narratives in the diaspora and how our stories shape our identity and well-being. And as André already mentioned, this is a collaboration between Hoki, Kaitzak, as well as the Diaspora Youth Ambassador Program. So, all righty.
So let me start to introduce you to Hoki. Hoki is a platform which was found last year by me and fellow Armenians from our youth association. We started Hoki because we saw a lack of mental health awareness in our community. The trigger point was for us a conversation about how men are discouraged to talk about their emotion. So this was the main point. We thought we need more conversation like this to bring more awareness and to shift the narratives also. So what we do is we want to create a space, a safe space for the Armenian community and raise awareness through our social media platform. To me, I'm Sarah from Germany. I was born and raised here in Germany, but always heard many stories about Armenia. So this is how I fell in love with Armenia. I moved to Armenia in 2019 to volunteer, and after finding a job, I decided to stay there. So 2022 is when I came back to Germany to start something new. Since I was always passionate about psychology, I started the new path. Now I'm studying psychotherapy and working and staying active in the social community, in the Armenian youth community. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah John. All right, so you heard a little bit about Kaitzak already as André introduced it, but Kaitzak is basically the first positive psychology-inspired platform to take a global approach to understand what a healthy diaspora community looks like. And so my name is Mariam Vahradyan. I am the co-founder of Kaitzak, and I co-founded it with André, of course. And so I... sitting right next to me. So I hold a Master of Applied Positive Psychology degree from the University of Pennsylvania. My research focuses on narrative, well-being, specifically within the Armenian community, but I'm also interested in globally just diasporic groups in general. I have been able to publish some of my research as well as my own creative writing in psychology journals and continue to present at conferences. One of the most exciting ones was at the UN General Assembly last year, which was a highlight of my life so far. So to start us off, I'm going to talk a little bit about positive psychology. So positive psychology, what is it? In case you haven't heard about it, it's basically the science of happiness and the science of well-being. So it's the empirical research focused at understanding what is working in our lives and how can we actually build on that instead of focusing on what psychology tends to traditionally look at, which is what's not working. So the question is, what is working and what strengths do we have as individuals and as a collective to be able to build on and to flourish, instead of merely just getting by. This might sound really wonderful. You might be thinking, this is really great, but what does this have to do with Armenians? Well, I am here to tell you today a lot. So Armenians tend and appear to embody a lot of the terms, the research that psychologists look at in this discipline. namely social support, things like post-traumatic growth, forgiveness, agency, resilience, perseverance, spirituality, transcendence, meaning-making processes, intergenerational connections, hope, and, thinking about the future. And the one that we're going to focus on today, which is storytelling. So this is just to get us thinking a little bit. I want you to think about when you were growing up, what were you hearing about the Armenian people? What kinds of themes came up in the stories that you heard? And so some of you might be Armenian, some of you actually might not be Armenian, some maybe grew up in Armenia, others in the diaspora. And what we have at the bottom here, which if you just look at the bottom right of your screen, you're going to see a little next to the it's like a little triangle with a circle and a square. If you can see that, it's called activities. So if you click on that, there is a Q&A section. And so I'm going to just write, what themes did you hear about Armenians growing? And you can just pop it, in the chat. And I might read some out just to get us started, but take a minute, think about it. And if someone is confused, by the way, this is at the bottom right of your screen, and it's called activities. It's a triangle, circle, and a square. So what stories, what themes were coming up for you when you were growing up? So one person wrote the stories of survival from the Armenian genocide. Definitely a big topic for Armenians. Anything else? Maybe some keywords, some themes, topics. Could be, where did you hear these stories? Okay, so we can start moving forward. It's just to get us started. Someone said Armenians are very social and hospitable. Definitely. Making life in an alien country. Okay, amazing. All right, so thanks for whoever responded. Oopsie, how is this? All right.
Okay, here
Sarah,
we go. Yes, let me introduce you to our agenda. First, I will talk about what storytelling is, the science behind storytelling, and how it can impact our well-being. After, Mariam will tell and share her findings from her research on how storytelling promotes well-being in the Armenian diaspora. And after that, we will also explore whether it is possible to shift the narratives we have, and if so, how we can do it. And in the end, we will have an open Q&A session. So let me start with storytelling. What is storytelling? Storytelling is the art of communication, how we communicate our ideas, experiences, and that's how we shape our identity, not only our identity of the individuals, also the collective one. So with sharing the history, culture, we help to name the events we experience and also to give them meaning. So the stories we tell don't only impact our lives today, but also our life in the future. And not only our lives in the future, but also the lives of the next generations. So the science of storytelling. According to research by McAdams, storytelling isn't just recounting the events that happened. It's how we interpret, how we frame those events. It's basically the way we tell the stories. So whether we focus on pain or on resilience or the tragedy or the triumphs, these all shape the emotional, psychological response to it. So now I'd like to reflect on challenging times in your life. Just try to remember how you felt in that moment. Maybe it was overwhelming. Maybe it was sad, frustrating. But try to remember from the perspective now. How do you see it now when you look back? Maybe nothing has changed, but probably there's the possibility you see a growth in your strength, or the challenge you faced in the past gave you an opportunity of learning something new. So this shift of perception helps to interpret the experience we used to have and helps us to move forward in life. So the research has also shown that telling stories of growth and overcoming helps us to have a better mental health. So finding meaning in the challenges is linked to psychological outcomes that are much better. Now, what we want to focus today is, what are the stories Armenians tell about themselves? Do they want to continue tell the stories about themselves? And if so, and if not, how we can change those? With this said, Mariam, please tell us about the research you have did.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. So this was a preliminary study that I focused on during my thesis, during my master's program. And so these were 7 interviews that I conducted with Armenian Americans. So they had, there's quite a bit of diversity in their backgrounds, when their families had come to the US, why they had come. So of course, we're not going to get too much into the details, but these are just some general ideas that I pulled out. And I just want to make sure that everyone, of course, understands that I am not generalizing to how the diaspora is. I'm just talking about this one study based off these conclusions. So just keep that in mind. So I want to start off with the metaphor of an Armenian mosaic. So, of course, this mosaic consists of ornately decorated tiles that come together to create a really beautiful, entire piece. And so this is from actually the Balyan studios, and they create really beautiful ceramics. And the Armenian mosaics, to me, represent the collective memory. So our collective memory is basically the group's psyche. It's our conscience that we are always talking about, remembering, and this can be, in a church, this could be at home, in textbooks. So these are things that are shaped by major events. So things like, one person mentioned the Armenian genocide. Of course, this is a really big one. As all of us know, Armenians come together on April 24th to commemorate the Armenian genocide, but this is something that just is a part of our stories. But additionally, there are also significant cultural achievements or moments, such as Armenians being the first to adopt Christianity officially in 301. And so this is something that gets talked about a lot in our literature, in our conversations as well, in church, in schools. It could also be things like Armenia's, for some Armenians, it's part of our collective narrative that in the 90s, for Armenians who were living post-independence, of course, it was a very difficult, challenging time, cold winter, dark days. And so for many Armenians in the diaspora, this is a significant part of their collective memory. So collective memory is super important, but what I really wanted to understand as well, in addition to this, was, what are the different pieces of this larger mosaic, which I compared to what is known in the literature as a collected story. So collected stories are actually what we choose to pick and integrate into our lives because they might resonate with us. So this could be things that we hear in our families, stories that are personally meaningful to us. So it could be something that, for example, a family member who exhibited certain character strengths or virtues, and we really want to continue telling this because maybe we see a connection with them. We find that this story speaks to us in a certain way. So I'm going to focus on these findings from these collected stories in the remainder of this section. So when I zoomed out and looked at all these collected stories and the themes that were coming out, there were so many words that reminded me of positive psychology. Words like pride, family, faith, perseverance, and empowerment. You might be wondering, well, what about, some of these darker themes that we just discussed? And that was actually my first finding, which was that Armenian narratives have a combination of difficult, challenging negative emotions and positive emotion. So these narratives tend to balance things like joy, strength, pride, with also feelings like shame, embarrassment, anger, sadness, loss. And we're often dealing with pretty complex stories that have a mesh of emotions in them. And one person that I interviewed said they used this term Armenian pessimism, which I thought was a really interesting term, or like cold realism. And he said, you just have to keep believing. You won't see justice necessarily. You won't see the correct treatment of our people, but you keep believing and you keep having hope. And what that means basically is that somehow, for some reason, Armenians are able to keep going, even if we don't necessarily know that things are always going to be green and bright on the other side. So the second thing that I discovered was that stories are passed down over generations. What this does for people is, it makes people feel closer to their family members and also ancestors that they never actually met. And it also creates the sense of meaning and this transcendence, the spiritual almost element that they're never really alone. I think specifically in today's world that a lot of people do maybe experience this lack of meaning and larger connection to something larger than themselves. This was a really crucial component for providing a sense of meaning for Armenians. And one person that I interviewed said, there's something beautiful in knowing these stories. We are always connected to something larger than us. And so for those people who are able to look into their families and understand what had happened in their family and their entire journey, were actually able to overcome some of those feelings of cultural rejection or shame that they had been experiencing. Because the story is being passed down generation to generation, this begs the question, is it the same story that is just flowing from one person or one generation to the next? So this is the symbol of the Ouroboros, for whoever is familiar with it. And if not, it's pretty self-evident. It's a snake eating its own tail, and it's going in a cycle. So the Ouroboros represents a cycle that can't be interrupted. And the question is, are these narratives, are these stories that people are passing down actually just being copy-pasted and recycled over and over? And what I discovered from these interviews that I coded was that narratives are actually dynamic and they're constantly changing. What this means is we are not merely a vessel through which the stories flow through, but we, as an individual, are able to actively add our own opinions, values, and perspectives and shift the direction of the story. That doesn't necessarily mean we are changing the facts, but we can add layers that can change how future generations tell it as well. So this fun little visual is basically showing us that as an individual, you have the choice to be able to add your own opinions and thoughts to this. Which brings us to another really key component here, which is that it is a choice to want to retell the story, because the larger collective narratives are always surrounding us. But what we choose to continue to talk about and how we frame that is actually in our hands. For some people that I interviewed, initially they had felt that this personal responsibility was a bit too much. They felt overwhelmed by it. They felt like it was almost even a burden. But for all the people I happened to interview, and this is again not the case for everyone in the diaspora, after some period of cultural maybe distancing or rejection for a variety of reasons, when they returned to it, they returned to these stories, to their heritage, with a newfound sense of meaning and actually pride in having a personal, that sense of agency and responsibility in how they want to tell it. Some people said that I carry the responsibility to tell the stories of people who did not have the privilege to tell it. And one person said, you have to frame the narrative for yourself one way or another. It happened, but how you control it, how you think about and approach it, there is some agency in that for me. And so what agency means here is that the individual feels that they have some control over the outcomes and the future of their lives. So the final thing that I want to talk about here is that as Armenians, some stories that we tell seem to be missing bits and pieces. And unfortunately, that is possibly for a variety of reasons. One is maybe we just don't have some of these facts. We don't have some of the evidence. Maybe it was erased, right? We weren't allowed to collect or maybe even keep these details. But one really key part of these interviews, this theme that came up, was that the more detail we have, the more we're able to fill in the gaps. That helps our well-being. How does that do it? It actually buffers against some negative emotions that people had experienced towards their family, towards their collective, feelings like shame maybe, or anger, frustration, people who had learned about maybe substance abuse, for example, in their family line, who did not understand why these certain cycles were happening. And understanding the facts and knowing more allowed them to gain some empathy and perspective. That's number one. The second thing it does is filling in these gaps actually allows us to tell the full story. So another thing that's really important in this research is that understanding what happened before, during, and after an event allows us to have a more well-rounded understanding and actually allows us to tell the full story. This is an image from the National Archives of Armenia, if anyone has ever been in Yerevan, but this is, I put this image here because there was one individual I had interviewed, we can call him Grigor. But so Grigor felt very strongly about the importance of details in these stories, and he had actually gone, he was from the US, and he went to Armenia and he tracked down his family history, and he found his great-great-grandparents and their family in these archives. And he was really moved. He said he had goosebumps. But another thing he discovered was that some of the stories that his family was telling about which village they had moved from or escaped from, and when they had come into Armenia, they were not accurate at all. And so this was really important for him because he realized that having these details and evidence is really important to understand yourself as well and to be able to take back that narrative and tell it yourself. So that concludes my findings. What does this mean for us as individuals? What does this mean for us as community leaders, as creatives, as leaders in general? How can we start talking about moving our collective narratives, wherever they are at right now, to one that is more empowering and more agency inducing? Number one, we have to find out more details. We need to start talking to people and asking if we have access to this information. And this could really be talking to your parents. It could be talking to your community leaders. But we need to start piecing together what has actually happened, which will allow us to tell a more coherent story. So that will also allow us to understand how we can tell the narrative in a way, as opposed to allowing, for Armenians, for example, to let other countries potentially or other groups write our story for ourselves. Another thing that is super important is to start thinking about how can we start telling strengths-based narratives. This, by the way, just to clarify, does not mean we change the facts. We don't want to erase our history or anything that's happened to us, but how we choose to talk about it. What are some of these strengths or values that allowed people to get through difficult or even joyful times, right? So what were those things, and how can we bring that from maybe the background of the conversation to the foreground? And finally, we have to take accountability, and we need to understand that we as individuals, as communities, have this responsibility to retell the story in a way that is going to promote well-being in our communities at large.
Thank you, Mariam Jan, for telling us your findings. What I want to say is Hoki is trying to help the individuals through creating safe spaces, to raising awareness, and to motivate and empower to start to self-reflect more. So what we try to do with storytelling is to foster empathy and understanding. And what this can help to is by sharing our stories, we can help to build this kind of spaces, and we can help the individuals to understand, to connect, and to support each other more. Yeah.
And I might just jump in on this part. So from a collective perspective, so with Kaitzak, what we're endeavoring to do and what we have been doing is looking at the community from a more bird's eye point of view, and finding the things that sort of link us all and affect us all. So culture is obviously a big one, cultural preservation, promotion, and really trying to understand what's going on in the diaspora, how are people evolving the culture and taking it forward. That's really interesting. So just as an example here, we've got the podcast Story Loom. The next is community governance. How do we structure our communities? So in the upcoming National Youth Forum, this is a topic that I'm really pushing for, that we need to look at case studies of successful community groups that have grown, have been strengths-based, and continue to grow over a long time and don't stagnate. There's many examples in the diaspora of sort of organizations that that for one reason or another just cannot get the ball rolling in a way that sort of allows the community to grow and to get young people involved in decision making. And finally, the meaningful decision making. The last part is research, and obviously finding ways, empirical ways, to back up community health. So it's not a subjective, it's not a community group discussion. It's not a well, this section isn't that. It's not a subjective opinion. It's what does the evidence show, and how can we use that to help our communities grow and thrive.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up for today. But before we finish up and move on to our Q&A, I just have this lovely visual, which I personally admire a lot, and it just shows that cycles can be repeated or they can be broken. It's from the New Happy Co. And so I just want to leave you with this one question of what is one story that you yourself today can start telling differently based off the these pillars that we discussed today. How is one way you can start shifting the narrative? Thank you. So one person says, what's a good way to start getting the community to align on the stories we tell ourselves? Good question. Sarah, do you have an answer, or do you want me to take that one?
I think first we have to start with every individual who has to start to self-reflect more, so we can figure out if the stories we told ourselves the years, if it's even true, or if it's possible to change the narratives. So I think from my perspective, every individual has to start to do their own work, so we can change the collective and the community's narratives. What is your opinion, Mariam?
Great point. So something I'll just share. When I was writing my, before I started writing my thesis, I was thinking of, proposing a workshop and some kind of intervention to start getting people to change this narrative. And then I realized I don't actually know what the narratives are. And it was almost equally problematic for me to just assume the narrative had to be changed. I'm like, what are we changing? Why are we changing it? And so that's the reason why I decided to conduct interviews to understand what are these stories. Are they, supporting this well-being claim, or are they not? So I think just to start, first understand your community. Do the research. So that could be talking to people. That could be, if you're able to do this, hosting like workshops, focus groups, etc. Because I don't believe that we need to just come in and intervene and immediately pathologize something, because these narratives might actually, in certain communities, might be promoting well-being. And in that instance, I would say maybe we look at what the strengths are and we just amplify that. So I wouldn't, I want to just be careful that we don't take like a one-size-fits-all approach and assume every diaspora group has X or Y narrative. So I would say starting with collecting data and talking to people and understanding what, what's going on, what stories are they telling, is it helping them, or is it actually keeping them stuck? And sometimes people are pretty upfront with you, like, yeah, this is not helping me, and vice versa. So talk to your community, and then once come back and talk to us at Kaitzak, and we can help. All right. So one person asked, "Thank you for the presentation. You're so welcome. It was very inspiring, motivational. Thank you." The question is, how do we balance cultural awareness with modern community growth?
I think the individuals of the community need to be interested into it. So it's not easy to motivate the community which is not really interested in it. So I guess just to try and to start small and to show that it's not only the old, it's also can be transformed into the time of now. So even, for example, the Armenian traditional dances, if this could be an example, it's very old, but it can be also very fun to dance in our days. So just try.
I might add to that, not as a answer to the question, but just a interesting point. So what we've sort of discovered in our journey is that there's lots of people who are doing what Sarah's suggesting, and there are also a lot of people who take the old traditions and they begin adding to them and sort of bringing them into the modern age. And I think that's, it's obviously quite meaningful for the people who are doing it, but it also probably makes it more relevant for our, modern communities. Because it is obviously, you can't just stand there and very strictly be like, look, you guys need to find all this stuff interesting. There's people who are taking it and evolving it and making it interesting for today's age. So a lot of that stuff's out there. It's just, you got to find it.
Alrighty. So thank you everyone so much for joining today. I hope that every person took at least something that made them think or reflect on this topic. We're all three of us are available to chat more about this. And if you have any questions or just want to just have a conversation around this, we're more than happy to. You can email us. So thanks again, and I hope you have a good whatever time zone you're located in. Also, just thanks for joining from all the different time zones. I think we have people have raised their hands. People have raised their hands. What do I do? Are they asking questions? All right. Well, thanks everyone. And yeah, stay tuned
I want
for
to thank you too.
upcoming ZapTalks.
I want to thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you, André and Mariam, for this opportunity for a collaboration with Hoki. And yes, Mariam said, if you have any questions afterwards, you can always text us, email us, and we're happy to be there for you. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.